Do you think you can change the world? I don't think it can be done. The world is sacred. Can't be improved. If you were to tamper with it, you'd ruin it. If you treat it as an object, you'll lose it. Welcome to the Chicast. I'm your host, the Voice of Mindfulness, Marcus Julian Combo, here at TCWM Studios in your city of brotherly love, bringing it in this evening. And just making sure that we've got all those distractions turned down. Feel free to light your candles. Throw on a little incense like I will. And settle in for the evening as we get ready to take on some curves and moves that are going to get us feeling some G's this evening. I mean that. So as we get talking and as we get moving, feel free to leave your comments down below. And before we get started on a real way, I should say, I first want to give a huge shout out to licensed psychologist, author of The Passionate Life, and creating vitality and joy at any age, and host of the radio show and podcast, Dr. Mara and Your Golden Years, Dr. Mara Carpel, for having me on last night to promote Tai Chi, its benefits, and the Tai Chi Fit Tai Chi for Veterans program. And gotta tell you, I hope that the booking process here for the Chicast is as easy as it was for Dr. Mara's, the first podcast appearance I've done since this whole quarantine thing began. It was a great learning experience from the user standpoint, and I just want to give a great shout out to Dr. Mara Carpel, and again, being a great host in both sense of the words. Now, if you all want to listen to the replay of the podcast, including my interview, you can head on down to the description below and click on the links for Dr. Mara. She goes live on the radio. That's real radio, ladies and gentlemen, down there in Austin, Texas, every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Again, all those descriptions are in, or all the links are in the descriptions below. So it's a late night, and I've got my Philadelphia cup of tea here from our beautiful art museum. That's the one with the big steps. And Rocky Balboa isn't an inappropriate character to discuss in tonight's Chicast, yeah? So I want to put this up real quick because I do want to give the plug here. I'm still getting used to all the buttons and gizmos and gadgets. Oh, I know, I sound so old. But really it is, I need to put this thing at a different place at the desk, like right there, so I can see it, so it's right in front of me. That is, in fact, what I need to do. And if you are just joining us here at the Chicast, please do go down into the comments today and let us know what you thought about the podcast. If you listen to it, go into the interview, take your time. The thing about the internet is, well, it is forever, yes? Unfortunately, that means every single mistake that I made in the first, 4 minutes of the Chicast are just a part of the human record forever and ever until the end of time. Thankfully for me and my sake, I'm not that important. So, moving right along, I want to thank again Dr. Mara and her hosting. Just excellent hosting. Once again, Sundays, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Head on down to the description. Click on the link. She's got not only our interview, but the interviews for a ton of other incredible guests that will give you insights in so many different industries that I don't even want to spoil it. I want you to go down and I want you to click her link. All right, so another shout out to Dr. Mara there. Thanks again. So, a fresh sip of my cup of chi, because we are in fact going to feel a couple of G's as we go through this whole thing that we find ourselves in. Because today, of course, I'm thinking about our people in the Ukraine, right? My heart to the Ukraine, my mind in the Ukraine. I'm speechless in a moment where I find one... Exactly. I am speechless to find my world at war once more. And I feel that. I feel that tension. I feel that build. I feel it like you feel it. The anger, the doggedness, the need to want to have revenge, perhaps. I understand that all. And yet, I'm still asking, is there some kind of mindful idea here? Is there some kind of way that we can view what we're finding in the world through a lens that brings some kind of peace? And that is a hard thing to do when you realize that wars, no matter where they begin, no matter who starts them, no matter what part of the world suddenly finds itself in the grip of it, it always looks the same, doesn't it? There's always that movement by night, the aggression, the flares, the streaks, the explosions, the admissions or the denials of civilian targets, and then the reports of the lies. Every war, every single conflict we've seen seems to begin the exact same way. No matter whether it's in the name of conflict or whether it's in the name of freedom. Both sides seem to use the brass, yes? Now, I'm only saying this from the fact of we find ourselves here. Because, wow, it is the person who brought us here that needs some questioning, yes? At the very least, it is incredible to see the Tao on display, Tai Chi on display within the actions of a single person, and how this can create the kind of chaos that we see within the world we currently find ourselves within. What do I mean here? Say, Marcus, how in the heck does Tai Chi have anything to do with what we're seeing in the Ukraine? We are seeing with Vladimir Putin, a man who has the inability to allow the past to stay in the past. We are seeing one man's ability to bring his misery of a bygone world to the objects of his nostalgia. There is a strange injustice that the inability of one to not let go of their past must imprison so many of us all within it. Think, it wasn't just the Ukrainian folks, our Ukrainian family, that found themselves in a hot mess, in a different world. Markets around the world crashed. Futures have been changed. And I'm not talking about financial ones. Things are different. The world was headed in a direction, and now we've taken a turn. And that turn leaves us in the unknown. It feels, at least, it leaves us in the unknown. And thankfully, as our family in the Ukraine resist what is going on in their front yard, what I see is the world coming together to bring them support, to bring them aid. I understand why we're not putting boots on the ground. I do. I may not necessarily like it, but I also understand it. And what I love is that our family in the Ukraine are under no illusions of that as well. Their president seems very clear that on the ground, Ukraine does in fact stand alone. They must fight it themselves. But the true spirit of the world is with them, as our governments have banded together to send over supplies and allow the refugees passage from the war zone, while the brave stay behind to defend their homeland. There is a tightness in my chest today because of that. To see that we must allow the yin, the hands of others, to carry out what we might wish to do ourselves. And in that constitution, right? In that understanding that Putin's inability to let go of the past, as we do in Tai Chi with each move, right? You have to let it go to move on to the next one. You have to let go of your breath to go on to the next one. But also understanding that on the yin side of things, the non-aggression, in this case, boots on the ground in Ukraine, actually supports in a way that takes the power away from the aggressor. Right? One of the first things I thought of when this all began was with all the training that the Ukraine has had, with all the funding from Western nations, there is an amazing opportunity that they pull this off, that they pull this out and rebuff the invaders. Whew. And in this right here, we find that mindfulness, yeah? Because I heard you. You're like, oh, Marcus, where do you find mindfulness in all this disaster? How can you see beauty in this disaster? And that's because I'm seeing it for what it is. Yeah? This is a disaster. But I want you to keep in mind, we are most likely watching the end of the reign of Vladimir Putin. That is not just good for the world, that is exceptionally good for the Ukraine and the Russian people. Yes, we will all take a sigh of relief when Putin is removed from power, but the Russian people who have lived under him since the beginning of Russia, essentially, and the Ukraine, Georgia, so many nations surrounding Russia that have lived under fear of his actions, they will feel relief so much differently than the rest of us. And I look forward to that day. There is that silver lining. There is that thing we can look forward to in order to find our spirit to keep supporting our families. Now, admittedly, the end of his reign will be another nail in the coffin of the attitudes and values of the 20th century that are meddling in the affairs of the 21st. We have bigger fish to fry. Because when you think about it, when the Ukraine successfully regains the nation, defends their country, there'll be an instant hit with NATO. I don't see why the EU wouldn't bring them in now. Seems important. And it becomes a bulwark against Russia. If no Putin is there, the place holder, or how do I say this? The reasons with an upgraded government, with a new government, with a more in the now government, let's say, a lot of these slates get wiped clean. A lot of these attentions and focuses get turned internally again. Fixing things. Investing in one's people. You know, what governments do. Right? Now, I see you guys watching. So, down in the comments, tell me, how are you feeling with all this? Where's your mind? Where's your body in the world? Are you struggling with finding your center, finding your ground? Maybe not just now, maybe way before this. Right? Because the interesting thing in what we're seeing, right, in that removal of Putin, right? Or I'm saying, in what we're seeing, the interesting thing of what we're seeing, I'll get it right sometime, people. The interesting thing of what we're seeing is not the disaster itself. In what he did, we've seen the world come together. We've seen people come together. Lines erased, borders ignored, for good and for bad, yeah? You start to see the mindfulness come forward here. You start to see the balance. Balance doesn't necessarily mean everything's cool, right? Conflict is balance. Your body's metabolism is bigger things or eating smaller things over and over again until there's nothing left, right? Or ever smaller things eating and breaking down things until there's... Yeah? Well, this is a world changer. And there are those around us, those around the world right now where this event has spurred something great, something that's powering them from within. There are great works that are going to come out of this. Works of art and literature, music, movies that come from a place of either pain or healing, loss. The human experience will come out of this. Lives that would have gone one direction will suddenly find themselves with purpose and saved. And I can't imagine that the diplomatic processes of the world will remain the same after this is over. Russia will likely fall back into the hands of its people, and that isolates China and North Korea. The places where authoritarianism are prevalent begin to shrink, right? Oh, the EU. I've been watching the news, and the EU really is stepping up to a leadership role. Yeah? And that has been a fantastic thing. Learning the EU now. Exactly. The EU learning what strength is. Learning how to face adversity, to including this, to the willingness to lead in meeting Putin with strong force. Yeah? I'm going to head down here into the comments. So you guys, we have Ember Dream saying, happy the countries are supporting Ukraine, but sad people are losing their lives and homes. Absolutely, Ember. No questions there. It's one of the reasons I often try to find the balance in these situations. There are moments in people's lives that are so out of the norm, to put it mildly, that it is incredibly hard for many people to undergo just the experience of listening to it, let alone experiencing and seeing it. Now, as our family there suffers, we now suffer with them, only in spirit, mind you. But we get a sense and a share of that, and so this is an exercise in that mindfulness right here, to really reach out and feel that pain, to put yourself in those shoes, right? That's kind of how I've been feeling. It's like, this is my chance to do this. And so, Ember, you are absolutely right in that. And then my sister Cosmina, from the Tai Chi perspective, she says, seeing it as a martial art, when do we start attacking the enemy, or do we bounce all the time from the pounces? Isn't that playing defense? I know we need to stay in the center, but where is the center between offense and defense? Ooh, now that is an incredibly good question, and I love it, right? At times of war, what do we do? What do you do at first? Well, and at first, you, of course, Tai Chi would tell you, don't be where the punch lands, right? It's not that the punch isn't being thrown, it's that the punch won't find you. And that's a good way of going. Well, then the next step. What happens if you can't dodge the punch? What if you are outnumbered, you're cornered, you metaphorically cannot get out? There's no escape. Tai Chi is going to tell us that we can move 1,000 pounds with 4 ounces, that we want to take care of the situation with the least amount of effort possible, right? Now, from a strategy perspective, I can honestly tell you that one actually already went out the window. So since we are now in the position of being in the fight, what do? 1, we cannot think of our opponent as anything other than a human being. We have to approach this battle the same way we approach it as a funeral. Because that's what it is. Line from the Tao Te Ching hit me. When you celebrate a war, you celebrate by mourning. And so, we may not like that answer, but now that we are there, we have to maintain in our minds that even Vladimir Putin is a human being. What does that mean? It means what is possible in him is possible in all of us. I don't mean on the scale. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of anyone who ever listens to me will not be the head of state of Russia. But to make sure that what he is doing on a macro scale isn't something you're doing on a micro, right? Or isn't being done to you on a micro scale. Because at that point, now we can use these defensive tools. But the idea here is that we are not in this to triumph. We're not in this to build statues, have parades, give out medals, or win awards, or beat our chest in pride. We do this because we're forced to, and we'll stop the moment we can. And then we do what we have to, because that's the game that has been chosen to be played. And when we do it that way, it's not about the fight. You go to war with the peace in mind. You don't go to destroy the enemy. Right? You remain honest. We're here to defend. That's what separates the quote-unquote good guys from the bad guys, if you will. That temperance. That's why, in a reasonable fight, there are no good guys or bad guys. If both sides have temperance and an honest conflict breaks out, the moment the conflict itself has been tempered, temperance will return. It won't be held against the sides. So you see in that how our tiny conflicts mirror these bigger conflicts in a major way. Think about Think about Putin's that possession that he cannot let go of the past. He will not let go of the past. And he's willing to drag us all back there with him. Right? But ask yourself how often we do that to ourselves, yes? How often do we drag ourselves through mistakes we made in a past relationship? Or in an opportunity that we failed to meet the moment in at a job, right? Family. We weren't there as much as we wanted to be. You know how it is. The one that got away. You got a broken heart. There's that conversation that you never had. There's all sorts of things, right? If only I had said the right thing. We all have those. And so they can absolutely trip us up. And what happens is when you're stuck on that, we end up ignoring the present, right? See if I got this right. All right, mindfulness and conflict. Ooh, he's getting fancy, people. Not really. I pressed a button. So ignoring the present and actually sacrificing your future the moment you get stuck in the past. Now, we have a literal example of this here. Vladimir Putin wants to live in the past. And so, the future, the Soviet Union fell in 1991. The Ukraine has been a country since December of the same year. A large proportion of not just the Ukraine and Russia, but the entire world was not around when there was a Soviet Union. And many of us who were, the millennials, all now turning 40, we were kids. The Soviet Union was a boogeyman if you weren't there. For those of you that lived there, I understand it was an absolute different story, right? I understand that was a different kind of nightmare. But it was becoming that nightmare because of the weakening that had gone on within it. And so it was kind of a boogeyman to the very young. They were right there with Darth Vader and Cobra, right? But our parents knew them as something else. Entirely. Those that lived under them, knew them as something else entirely. That was their filter. And it's important in this moment to recognize how those filters can impact the decisions that we're making right here and right now, i.e. Vladimir Putin. Because the youth of the Ukraine, the youth of Russia, are fighting in this conflict. So the futures are actually literally being sacrificed for the past. Sometimes the Tai Chi isn't metaphor, right? Sometimes it's absolutely clear. And we want to take that moment to think about in our own lives where we do that, where we sacrifice something we've got going on right now, something that's good for us right now, because of something that we had in the past, right? Because what's the cutoff? You could make the joke that Italy could make a claim on Spain for the Roman Empire or Egypt on Syria. But that seems silly, considering their empires were thousands and thousands of years ago. But then what's the cutoff? right? Putin apparently doesn't think it's 30 years, obviously. So there's that. But if you wanted to pick a fight with the guy that knocked you into the locker in the 10th grade and you're pushing 60, we wouldn't look at that as a healthy way of approaching life. This is not a healthy way of approaching life. The difference is that we have an unhealthy person with power and influence, and his in-health or unhealth, ill health, is felt by everybody. It impacts everyone. Because honestly, we all feel everyone's everything. But he has the opportunity to actually impact people. And that is, once again, how you see the macro and the micro reflecting one another. And where this becomes problematic is if we don't see those micro movements in our daily lives, it leads to us almost being blind, I want to say. And I'm there. We're blind to our own mistakes. It's like when you write an essay and it sounds perfect in your head, and then you hand it over to an editor or your teacher or your friend, and there's a ton of red ink suddenly on the page, a ton of changes that need to be made, and you were like, I was sure it was perfect. We don't see our own mistakes. This is where we're blind, right? So, wow. Talk to me there in the comments, as we discuss this together. Where in your life have you seen, not necessarily your life personally, but where in life have you seen the past given value over the present and perhaps sacrificing for the future? Because this isn't the only situation. This is just the biggest and latest situation. Because when it comes to claims on things, the Ukraine, once again, has been out of the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union for over 30 years. It seems silly to ask everyone over the age of 30 to suddenly consider them, or everyone under the age of 30 to suddenly consider themselves Russian again. This is unnatural. And this is why we have conflict now. Because of one person's ability to ignore and therefore seize, not therefore, but seize what he wanted. Like a gamer playing Civilization. I was watching it unfold thinking, I've made that move in games before. Because you want something and you find any excuse possible to invade another player's territory. And I know that sounds like it trivializes what's going on, but the motivations that we have on the small end are ultimately the same motivations we may have on the large if we're not cognizant of it, if we're not mindful of it. That's how we get the mindfulness for the rest of us, yeah? Being mindful in our daily, because there is a place for the game, for this type of thing to happen. When you're playing a literal game, and no one's going to get hurt. But on the grand global scale, that requires a little more temperance. It requires us to look through the filter of the other side. Because the enemy is not a demon. The enemy is not some kind of monster. Oh, Ember Dream. Remember in school we had bomb drills. Yes, Ember, I do remember the bomb drills. I'm assuming you're talking about the mid to late 90s. Good God, maybe a little more after that, but I wasn't in school, or at least not in high school after that. But yes, I totally remember the bomb scares and many, many days spent on the bleachers right outside the track on the field. So, wow. Where was your muster point around the school? That's the question. Right, since we're going to go there. He says, let go of the past, and then he goes reminiscing with somebody in the comments section. See, this is what I'm saying, people. Mindfulness needs to be more a part of our daily. It's a practice. It is a practice. Oh, late 50s. Oh, you're talking about the big bombs. You're talking about drop and cover drills. That had to be scary. And this has to be a bit of a throwback to those times, I have to imagine for you. My goodness. Yeah. Feel free to expound upon that. We've still got some time. And I've still got plenty of voice left. I don't know if I have plenty to say, but I've got plenty of voice left. So, oh, wow. Yes, duck and cover drills. That had to be terrifying. But as a kid, if you were a kid during that time, I'd be interested to, find out what that was like as a child. Because that's a much different filter than the adults would have had. And the way that that we, looking back through the lens of history, have, one of the interesting things that I saw recently on TikTok was videos about school shootings from our younger folks, our kids today, right? And wow. Seeing their take on things was a whole different eye-opener, and actually it broke my heart. So I would really be interested to see what kind of effect that had on you and your peers in the drop and cover drills of the classrooms. Wow. This is what I'm talking about, people. This is the filters that we need to kind of discover about ourselves, because in each person that's out there, when we talk in Tai Chi, when we're doing our push hands and finding our movement and our energies in the movement and energies of the person we're sharing space with, we, well, that's exactly what we're talking about here, aren't we? We're mirroring them. We're sharing the experience, even though you can never truly share the exact same experience. You can filter the same experience together. And that is just a part of our beautiful shared experience. I know I'm saying experience a lot, but speaking of experience, in this filtering, one of the things that I find to be magical about the world that we live in is that we can watch news anywhere and everywhere at any point, anytime, vis-a-vis YouTube, right? And what I found myself doing was looking around the international community for what their perspectives were, not just my own country's. And I found it to be fascinating. And I highly recommend it. If you've never watched another nation, another land's news, right? So you're from France and you've never watched Liberia's, or you're from Brazil and you've never watched Japanese news. You really want to give it a shot. You really, really do. Because in many ways, it broadens your perspective of the world in a way that very few things can. Every country covers the news from its perspective. Every country is the hero of its story. And every country's attitude toward everyone else is laden in that news, right? So, as what Ember is saying here, saying that it felt like the world was kind of scary because duck and cover drills were everywhere. There would have been cartoons on the television, infomercials, PSAs in the classes. There would have been siren drills, this whole like hurry up and wait kind of thing. And so this era of terror. It makes total sense that it would be scary as all get out. Now, why did it go that way? That was the fears of the adults being placed on the children. Right? And she's saying that she remembers not being able to play outside during the Bay of Pigs when the world almost came to an end, right? One of the two times that the world almost came to an end. And, oh my God, these are the fears of the adults. These are the miscommunications of the quote-unquote leaders at that time. Kennedy and Khrushchev, right? And at this time, it's Putin versus the world, so my money's on the world on this one. Right? But it is history doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. That much is true, said Mr. Twain, right? So we see how fear, if the adults had looked through the eyes of their children and saw what it was doing to their children, perhaps either the campaigns would have been different or perhaps the choices would have. Right? So filtering, or I should say, using the news of other nations to get a filter that's different, that's fresh. It's not going to be X, Y, or Z, anything different than what you get in your country. They have plenty of conservatives and liberals and people in the middle and publicly funded stuff out there. So whatever variety or menu you like to eat from, it's out there. But see the news from their perspective. See the world from their perspective. What is it like to be Polish during this? Right? What is it like to be, good. What's it like to be Indian while this is going on? That would be interesting. Right? Or, my God, Afghanistan. Haven't they had enough? Right? Is this going to cause more pressures on an already struggling people? Right? War doesn't just happen to one country from another country. It happens to the entire world. That's the central message of Tai Chi. That's why we want to avoid these things. That's why we want to come to some kind of understanding before it escalates to this point. Because it doesn't matter if the right hand and the left hand beat on each other. The entire body is going to feel it. And we feel that now, figuratively, literally. We feel it in the emotions we feel in watching the things unfold. We feel it in the markets dropping. We feel it in the supply chains being even more upset. And good God, do we feel it in the loss of life? The loss of futures, the losses. It is so much there is so much needless loss in this. So much needless loss. And a lot of it could be changed by simply listening. Simply listening. And the way we can start listening is just by filtering someone else's news. I would highly suggest doing it just for the local news, whatever your local news is. If you're living in Porto, look up Lisbon's local news, right? And just see what's going on there. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised what kind of fun things may be happening. I know, and this is a curve, but for Sophia's birthday, we went up to the Big Apple because I was watching New York's local news and saw that Chicago had reopened. So I'm like, all right, well, let's do that. Wouldn't have known it otherwise. So finding someone else's filter, looking for someone else's perspective, it can be invaluable to the way that you filter the world. And that can be invaluable to the way the world operates. The more experience you have, the more of the human experience you have had, making experiencing others easier. Right? There's not so much in the way of disagreement when you have and can plainly see the common ground that you stand on. Figuratively here, because we often kill each other over the ground we can see, don't we? But this too is sacred. This too is beautiful, because out of it, beauty will come, as it always does. Whew, goodness. What a world we live in, yeah? I mean, fantastical with Bond villains as heads of state. And, well, listen. Taking a look at how the actions of those on the large stage mirror those on our own, that allows us to have teachers that we wouldn't get otherwise. In some ways, they can be amazing teachers. They can be the authors that inspire us to write. They can be the musicians that inspire us to sing, or the scientists that inspire us to explore and learn. Or they can be the leaders who go too far. They can be the business folks that get too greedy. They can be the lawyers that have no ethics, that don't live by the law, right? Where is it that happens in us? We break speed limits, right? We fudge this on the taxes or do that on whatever paperwork. That's how it works. So we see that in ourselves, but we don't necessarily recognize that same thing in ourselves, but only unless we see it in someone else. Ooh, excuse me. Long day for me. But now that we know that what we see on the big stage is the exact same thing that's happening on the little stage, now we have some things to think about, right? Because where else can we apply this? What other stages, what other conflicts, what other struggles are unfolding right now in the world? Whether it be in sports, in politics, in your industry. Where is it happening? How is it unfolding? Right? Is Tom Brady just a football player that retired? Or is it a man who was at the top of his industry who has now faced his first death? Which one is it? Depending on how you want to filter that, will determine the lesson that you bring away from it, and whether or not following Chris Hemsworth on Instagram is for study or for fun. On that light note, I want to thank our patrons. As always, these people stepped right in when we opened the doors. We didn't even have the lights installed. And here they are helping keep those said lights going, flickering, making them happen. And you can join these folks, these wonderful folks, at www.patreon.com/withmarcus, where you can get a whole bunch of behind the scenes stuff. We've got classes that are going live here in the upcoming weeks. We've got full on Chicasts like this one that will be uninterrupted yet highly edited and all that kind of fun stuff. Uninterrupted soul flows and some behind the scenes stuff with the psychology series as well as any upcoming news. And even if you can't do actually give any moolah, just show up and get the follows. There's a lot of information that goes out exclusively to the patrons. That said, even if you don't want to do that, if you're trudging around the socials, @with Marcus, just pop it in there. I'm going to be one of the ones that pop up. I'm not that popular just yet, right? But here we are. All right. So go ahead, join our patrons. And if you can't, like, share, and subscribe. If you're doing the Facebook thing, check us out on Facebook as well. TikTok, IG, we're all over the place. I'm trying to think of more things to do. I'm thinking about specializing each format and putting out certain things on each format. And I'm just kind of in the midst of deciding things. I've got my social media person who I'm going to be meeting with tomorrow, and she'll be giving me the once over to make a lot of it happen. So I should probably make sure I drink a lot of caffeine, because it's going to be a long day. All right, guys, I want to thank you for helping me bring this to you, bring mindfulness to the rest of us, and bring a new perspective to a world that's kind of got an old one, especially what's going on in the news. I hope this helps. I really do. I hope that it sheds how even in disaster, mindfulness is there to be had. In fact, it's during disaster when we need it the most. That was the whole purpose of it the whole time, was to find it then and there. Thank you for joining me on the Chicast today. Until I see you again, to you and yours, peace and love.